Hello,
Hello.
sir.
How are you? You're back from
Good.
vacation. I'm back from vacation.
Yeah, I got a little bit of a sunburn. I'm in a new room. I usually dial in from something called the podcast studio. It's not in my house. I'm in a co-working space every day, but a little bit different backdrop for me today. Yeah, vacation was good and it's fun to, it's like nice when you're working on something that you love. When you sort of like, what's that first day back from vacation feel like? Do you get the sort of like Sunday scaries about stuff? I'm just like, every day I just go and I'm like, yeah, like so much like interesting stuff to build and learn and
Yeah.
manage my little fleet of agents and try to figure out like what should they be doing. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. How are
Yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah. Good. I am also not in my podcast studio. I forgot that it was parent-teacher conferences this week, so the kids are home from
Hmm.
school and the middle one naps in my office. So hanging out outside. Fortunately, the weather's good. So it's CLI week, apparently. Everyone is launching a CLI.
Apparently, everyone decided, yeah, I mean, the stripes thing, and then I saw ramp. I was like, did y'all just like have a memo to decide like this is CLI week? Yeah, I
What do
love it. What
you
do you think?
I mean, part of me thinks that it is a damnation of MCP, right? Because isn't this what
Sure.
MCP was
Yeah, for
supposed to
sure.
do? And now we're all like, actually, I would rather have a CLI. So that was my first thought. I loved using projects.dev. I used it to spin up a new Vercel project, and it was sick. I'm glad Stripe is there.
Cool.
It seems like
Yeah,
exactly
you
the right
should
place.
probably for people who don't know, you should probably say what is projects.dev if they didn't see it.
Yeah, projects.dev is Stripe's extension of their CLI to allow you to create accounts or projects with Vercel, Neon, the database. I saw a couple
Hmm.
other folks in there. Clerk, I think you can do.
Hmm.
And it's a use case that actually I think you have been talking about for a long time, which is I start hacking on something, I get a project going, I'm really, really excited.
Hmm.
And the moment I have to add auth, it becomes a pain because
Hmm.
you have to leave your terminal or you have to leave your IDE and you have to go to a website, click, 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 click. And
Hmm.
they're using the CLI as the
Hmm.
surface that allows you to do that. And they're allowing you, they're not really saying this in the launch docs, but to me, it seems pretty pointed at the one that's going to be using this is the agent, not the human.
Hmm.
I'm also a little jealous because about a month ago, I started poking at a like CLI idea. And if I hadn't been away, I
You should have
swear
done
I would have
CLI
shipped it.
launch week.
I know, man. I missed it. I was like, those guys at Stripe, they ship. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was cool. It's like, it's another way you could say it, I guess, is kind of like headless. It's like the way that and I sort of, since I'm kind of a history nerd, it's like, where did the CLI come from? I always love going back and reading like the early history of like early Unix, I don't know, 1971 to 75, that era. And like, when did they come up with pipes and kind of the philosophy, like everything's a file. And it's interesting, like, when you use agents, like you kind of just peer at their tool calls, it's like super Unix brain. And they're using all these like tools like sed and awk and RG, like, like think some of them I don't even know what they are. And so it was interesting to play from Stripe. Though I would have guessed okay, some open source version of this, or I would expect like Vercel to do something like this, then it would probably be on their hosting. So like who is sort of you're like Anthropic, I would have expected would do something like this, but it is interesting from Stripe because you basically need the providers, I guess, to like
It's
have
very
interest in
stripey.
like
It's very
yeah.
stripey to
I mean,
do
they
it.
started as what dev payments, so it's sort of like what if it was just like dev star like headless, grow the GDP of the internet, but like we're gonna need like headless versions of all this stuff, for agents to spin things up. It is like on brand for them, I think.
It is. It's also kind of cool to see Stripe more fully embracing getting out of just payments. I mean,
Hmm.
I should say I used to work at Stripe. My old team is the team that is was behind projects.dev. I have
Cool.
no information about this. This all happened after I
Yeah.
left.
Sweet.
But it is, we were the team that was like farthest away from payments. And in fact, occasionally people will be like, oh, you worked at Stripe, you know how this like obscure chargeback thing works. And I was like, nah, man,
Hmm.
like never
Hmm.
really worked on that. I was on the app side, and I'm just excited for it. I think Patrick and the rest of the folks there do have real opinions on how the internet should be built. They have really good taste, and it's great to see them getting into this. I'm excited.
Yeah. I mean, the CLI thing makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's also, to me, it's also, I'm like very bullish on skills. I'm quite excited and kind of like pretty skill pilled these days, but I feel like that kind of goes along with it. And if I think about sort of the history here, back in the sort of like early LLM era, like, ancient times, like 2 years ago, there was like a completions API, and it was just sort of doing text completions. And then one of the things that got me excited about LLMs was when function calling came out. And that was just like dropped in the middle of some like blog post in the middle of the summer from OpenAI, or that was about this thing called function calling. Like, what is that? And I think what happened there is like early ChatGPT, they added something called plugins, which failed. No one remembers this anymore. It was the kind of before custom GPTs, and before now they have GPT apps. They've had a few tries at this, but the first one was this thing called plugins, where if I wanted to like have a diagram, it could like call whimsical, or like little things that would sort of like appear in ChatGPT. And so I think if that kind of make that system work, like how do you get the model to decide like when to call a tool? And so even though plugins failed, I think the kind of API version of it with function calling was like quite successful, and then it evolved into sort of tool use on one hand and then structured output on the other. Sometimes you just want JSON and you're like, I'll take it from here. Sometimes, you want it to sort of call a tool. But then, and that was like really sweet. So I think a lot of the sort of early sort of interesting applications were involving tools in some way. But then you like get this bloat of like the context windows. There's like more and more tools in there. And this is like one of the problems with MCP as well. You have this kind of complicated protocol. And so there's something like just nice about, okay, we're just going back to basics, like files, CLI tools, but then what you probably want is like also like a little bit of like instruction about how to use the CLI. So I increasingly see the services I'm using, like if they don't have a copy markdown, button for me, I'm like, I'm out of here. This is not for me. But then I'm like, I'm using like Firecrawl, for example. And, instead of using their TypeScript SDK, it's like, here's a skill. And it just uses their CLI. So I'm like, sweet. Like you need instructions about how to use the CLI. I don't need MCP. I think it is pretty cool.
Yeah, I wonder if this is going to kind of go down the app route where the CLIs and the skills are going to be the new apps. I mean, obviously a big part of OpenClaw's like success has been the skills directory. At least to me, it seems like it
Hmm.
helps people get to the point where they can use skills where it's not exactly obvious how to do that without that direct. You have another problem
Hmm.
you have to solve. You not only need to know that you want to do it, you need to know how to find it. And if somebody is showing it to you, you're like, oh, okay, cool, I'll try that out.
Totally. I mean, credit to Anthropic. They're pretty good at, I mean, they're just good at product in this area, I think. But, Claude Code has always been kind of inspiring. But just like, it's an interesting, like, it's almost like memes. Like, what is a skill? It's really like a meme or a convention where it's just, hey, let's just use all caps skill.md. And then, like, you can have a resources folder, you can have an assets folder, you can have, like, a scripts folder, and there's just like some website that's like, here's kind of the spec, but it's just like a meme that we're kind of agreed on. It's all just like marked down in some files. But what I like about it, what is a skill? Is it an app? Like that's I think one reasonable metaphor. Kind of like in the iPhone era, is like, okay, there's an app for that. I can job to be done. Here's an app. In
Hmm.
the agent era, it's like, okay, there's I'm using Excel. Where's the skill that like teaches it sort of this domain specific knowledge? But I actually think my blog that I had been sort of just nerding out on for a while, I was partly trying to figure out for myself, like what is almost like the React component of instructions or context?
Hmm.
Because it seemed like we were in the early era of the web where it's like, JavaScript, one big JavaScript file, and it
Right.
worked for a while. And then when that starts to break, you're like, okay, what do we do here? And so, it wasn't that it was like specific to React, but just the idea of like, what is that, a component? I think of an application on the web as like a tree of components. Okay. And so, when I was talking about like markdown coding, I built a spec tree thing. I had like fuzzy executables for a while. I called them .exe.md, and they were sort of just like, here's a thing you can run. But the skill, I was like, oh, right, that's what you want. Is I think they just kind of nailed it of like it starts as just a prompt. So if you just want a simple prompt, cool, that's all you need. It's sort of progressive. You have like a bunch of documentation. You don't want to put that all in the context window. You can like let the agent decide what to read from there. You want to add scripts that it can actually execute things. So it just feels like the right kind of container almost of like some domain specific knowledge and like behavior that we want to add to agents, and then you can kind of compose them together in a nice way as well. Like on agents.md, you get one of those.
Mm.
But like skill, I want this skill, I want that skill, and yeah, it's really cool.
So when I've been hacking around on this with the CLI product, and I hope by the next time we do this, I'll be able to like launch a demo. One of the things that I've been doing is I basically decided that this isn't for humans. So the help command on the CLI is like way more verbose than you
Mm,
would ever want it to be for a person. Like there are going to be things in
mm,
there that
mm,
you would never take the time to type out. I mean, maybe you will. I'm sure
mhm,
someday
mhm,
one person will if it goes somewhere.
mhm.
But it's optimized for somebody for whom it's easy to kind of spit that out. And I'm toying around with should you have a like a skills option that then like writes that skill to the directory that's in as like just a .md file,
Mhm,
it basically just like puts it in for you so that all you have to do is like you install go,
mhm,
right? And
mhm.
it can kind of teach the Claude agent that it's in to like go really fast. Anyway, there's so many cool
That's cool.
possibilities that come out of this.
Yeah. Yeah, does your
opportunity.
CLI install the skill, or does the skill install the CLI? Like, what's the program?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not. I mean, I'm not realistic. I've created some skills for myself. I haven't installed that many skills. So I'm not really sure how people
Hmm.
want to do it.
Hmm.
I don't know. What's your instinct there?
I don't remember. Yeah, I mean, it depends, I guess, on the tool chain. I mean, if you look at something like Firecrawl, I think they have a nice help page. Basically, like it's a kind of like about our CLI, but also like the skill to teach the agents about the CLI. Would use they had a pretty good docs page. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I mean, even in our code base, we're sort of like thinking about just like skillifying a bunch of stuff. There's various things, various like complex ways we're sort of doing the context engineering. And I'm like, oh, like some of these should just be skills. Now, there was a blog post from Vercel, maybe like, I don't know, when it's like 2 months ago or something, that kind of was like I almost took it as a point of caution because they did some evals where what they basically, what they want is agents should be able to write like good Next.js code. And so they started by like, making evals that they could start to kind of measure which agents are sort of good at that. But then they created, they basically have like a few tools where you can like pull the whole Next.js docs. There's a lot of them. So you pull that locally, and then, how do you sort of teach the agent to use them rather than whatever is in its training weights? And they did an eval where they tried agents.md versus skills.md, and agents.md won, mainly because it just forgets to use the skill. And, even, and they were trying to just sort of all caps, like, you must, use the skill. And it's just like, you're kind of at the agent's mercy of like whether it decides to do it. Now, I assume that's going to get fixed. I
Yeah.
think there's enough like momentum around the skills idea that like, I think all the labs, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, are going to just like train the models to use skills, and like that's going to get fixed. But it's sort of like a short-term problem that anyway, and we're kind of like, I'm like, oh, a lot of this will just be cleaned up if I turn this into like different skills that are sort of invoked in different contexts rather than just like, this quite complex kind of method of like, context engineering.
I mean, kind of stepping back, I do think it is kind of a magical moment where you could think of things like I'm sure there's no CRM that is a CLI, right? Or that is
Hmm.
primarily a CLI, but you could probably like get that together pretty quickly. And if there might be
Yeah.
some interesting things that come on top of that, I'm not building a
Hmm.
CRM
Oh,
CLI. I mean, I
I
might
mean,
see if I can one shot it, but it's not my ambition.
the other
Yeah.
one I want is GitHub. I don't know. I just came across this like Pierre thing yesterday, and I was like, oh, this is, because like GitHub is just not, doesn't really feel like it's built for agents or even the workflows that I'm doing. Once I get to GitHub and there's like a ton of code there, I'm like, it's like reviewing over here kind of sucks. Anyway, Pierre has this. I was just poking at it yesterday, but it's just like it's like GitHub hosting that's like super fast for agents, like via CLI. Like if you kind of just change the assumption that like, agents are going to be the ones creating and sort of interacting with code rather than sort of humans clicking buttons in a GUI, you might land in a pretty different place. But you're probably right. That's probably like a good idea generator right now, is like,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
because
yeah.
the incumbents, I think, actually don't really, their incentive is like not to go headless. Everyone's like, oh, please, like, give me headless Workday, give me headless Salesforce. But if you're like one of them, like, do you really want to just like give a CLI to all of your data that everybody can use? Like, probably not, which means there's sort of maybe a disruption opportunity. I don't know how many of them are like VC size, but like, headless, you take an existing software category and do the headless version that like the incumbents don't want to do. Like, you could probably get some traction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily know where is the best place to play in
Hmm.
that. I've obviously like, I had one of these that I was toying around with, but I don't know. I think it's hard for big companies to change. I think I'm at a like, small to medium size, I guess small startup right now for my day job. And it is very, very difficult to be a team of more than like 10 and figure out how to do AI well, because I do think that it's still hard for humans to switch between being coordinators and being builders. Even if you can build way, way more coherently by yourself,
Right.
like getting a coherence layer is really, really challenging. And in some ways, I almost feel like we've replaced coherence as the primary problem rather than speed. Like now, speed is
Hmm.
easy,
Hmm.
but coherence
Totally.
is actually still quite hard. In some ways, a car that can go faster is harder to steer.
Hmm. Hmm.
My 5-year-old can do the little Tykes car, but I would not put her in a Formula One car. That would be very difficult. And now a bunch of us have Formula One cars. I'm not sure we don't do. I'm not sure I know what to do with it.
Well, this is very real for me because, I'm doing a startup with my wife. We have one other engineer who's amazing. Like, I'm just all my intuition about like how should we grow a startup? I don't even know how to think about it anymore. Like, because, my early, asked me like 2 years ago. I would say, okay, you probably want one of the founders basically doing everything other than engineering. So all the sort of like sales, go to market, fundraising, manage the HR, so like everything. And then you want one founder who's just like engineering. And then you probably want at least your first 5 hires to be software engineers, maybe 10. Like don't add a PM, don't add a growth person, don't add a marketer too early. Like it's like 10 engineers, and then you get enough product market fit that like you're feeling overwhelmed. You're like, oh gosh, like we're doing support, and I need to like hire someone. But like now that like when we started, it was just me and some quads and codexes, and I could build like the whole not like everything production ready, but like enough to basically start selling stuff to customers with like one person. And then when we found it was like super important to find who's our first hire, and he's awesome. But what it felt like, I mean, it's like we doubled the engineering team. But now it's two of us managing a bunch of quads and codexes and just beefing up lots of our testing and review process so we could like I mean, how do we even review the code that we create as two people?
Hmm.
And so, and I was on a walk with them yesterday. I was like, hey, we want to hire like a third. Like, what else would we need to do? Who do we want that person to be? But what it feels like, it doesn't actually feel like we're hiring like another IC to get more
Yeah.
throughput. It feels
Yeah.
like you're almost hiring like an engineering manager who's going to
Sure.
like come
Sure.
with a team of like 10, maybe junior, mid-level engineers. It's like it's like each hire is like pretty important. It's, I don't know how you, yeah, like scale. You're right. The car drives very, very fast. And so like each driver of the car can either like if they have good product sense and kind of or good engineering skills, they can like do a whole lot very quickly, or if they're pointing the wrong direction, they can take you off a cliff pretty fast too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or even just go in slightly different ways that
Yeah, that
make
too.
the product just a little bit incoherent for
Mm,
users. Because I do still think that user friction matters, and not all it is actually tough to add new things in a way that doesn't add friction.
totally.
And just figuring out how to do that is not easy. And I think it's particularly hard when you have an old way of doing things to switch to a new way of doing things. As a group, because you need everybody to move at the same time. If half of the people at one of the software companies I worked at right before this massive launch switched from HipChat to Slack, and it was chaos
Mm,
because half of
oh
the
yeah.
team was
How
on
do you even do
HipChat
that?
and half of the team was on chat, and I, as the product manager, was in the middle, copying and pasting back and forth
Yeah.
between those. That was not a great week.
I mean, isn't this why the whole like Accentures and Deloittes of the world exist, and they've been
Yeah.
selling some version of digital transformation for decades, and it was like moving from on-prem to cloud, or it was like various sort of transformations. They're very hard, and or like why these like the software like SAP or something. I've just like heard these stories of like you go in, you map out this whole process, you build some custom ERP, and then there's like the go live day, and it's just like chaos, and then it's like very entrenched. It's like hard to change that thing.
Is there any not terrible way to measure engineering productivity? This is what has me thinking about this, is that
Yeah,
our leadership team wants people more engaged with AI. Of course, they
yeah.
want a way to measure this, but all of the options for them to measure it seem abysmal. What are your best choices?
It's a good question. I think it probably is a different answer, like for me personally, or as a small team, or what, like at a bigger organizational level. 'Cause, I mean, I think this came up. Ade, who was on our call, or whatever last time. I mean, we had this little discussion about, like I'm a believer. I got this idea from James Cham of like I'm trying to use as many tokens as I possibly can for me, for my team, because it's forcing me. I mean, I'm probably wasting some, but like I sort of have an implicit assumption that like me, the other guy, like people we hire are gonna have like good enough judgment that we're not just gonna like completely waste it, or we're not doing just like vanity metric kind of stuff. But if I think of them as kind of like engineering thinking minutes, roughly, like I want to use more of them, and I want to sort of figure out like if I try to use more, actually like the bottlenecks, move somewhere, and like it's actually harder for me to. I'm probably spending like a couple thousand a month, I think, on tokens right now. But like if you told me to 10x, I don't know quite what I would do. I'd probably have to spend a lot more on like testing and evals, and not. I don't need more on like code generation. That part is like not the problem. But at an organizational level, I don't know. If you sort of said, "Hey, everyone should use as many tokens as possible," like that's probably not a great thing. And it's like we haven't ever really figured out in decades of trying to measure like human engineering teams how to measure it. So I don't really expect us to like come up with like great answers now just like because of AI. So I think it's a hard question. I don't know. I mean, what are you seeing? Kind of like if as you try to think about it, like what would you do in a more
Yeah, I mean,
organization?
I have a lot of empathy for all sides of this, because
Yeah.
as a younger worker, an earlier career person, I would have felt very cynical to be judged on whether or not how many tokens am I using.
Totally.
I'd be like, really, are
Yeah,
you
it's
going to grade me
ridiculous.
that way? And
Totally.
then at the same time, I'm senior enough at this company that I know the leaders pretty well. I know that they don't care. Like they're not like, oh, you're down 5% on your tokens. What did you do this week? I think, but they are like, look, they want to see the organization change, and they know that how we work has to change, and they need some way to know whether or not that's going well. I guess if I was forced to do it, I would have people probably like write in to a survey question once a week, like, were you able to do this? But even that has its own. I mean, look, there's no way to get around the fact that like your job can fire you. So you can't be
Yeah,
fully honest in that situation. I think trust helps,
right.
culture helps. Like I feel really good about the culture and the people, but I also understand that
Yeah.
like not, it's a job. Like at the end of the day, it's a job, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a
So
great answer. I think, and I guess I guess where you get in trouble. I mean, if you sort of think of it as like a performance metric, if what you're trying to do is drive organizational change and ideally like shared learning across an organization and a culture, then you almost want to figure out like who are the people in the org that are being most effective and like what are they doing and how do we get them to kind of share learnings with others or like how do we sort of empower, different employees to kind of identify, hey, there's a bottleneck here. Like I always liked the kind of like Toyota Kaizen,
mm,
small improvement thing where like
uh-huh.
in the US, like at the GM plant, there was a real like never stop the factory line, so like the cars, if there was like a problem with the car, it would just roll off the end of the line and they'd like dump it outside. And it's just like, that one's messed up, man. But in the Toyota system, they were like, they kind of told every employee, no, if there's a problem, you should actually be empowered. Maybe you have to like go tell your manager or something, but like you stop the line, everybody comes over and like, you kind of try to fix it together. And so I kind of like that sort of, the factory workers that are closest to someone in the cars probably have like some good ideas about how to make this process more efficient. I also think of it like, if you think about like electricity, I mean, the reason tokens is sort of obviously a dumb metric in some ways is it's an input metric, not an output metric. We don't really know how to measure output of engineering teams very well. If we did, we might comp them like sales teams. That's like the one team where you're like, okay, we know how to like measure output and like your whole comp plan is like designed on that. Mostly we don't know how to do that with engineering teams. So tokens is an input, so obviously it's a dumb thing to like maximize. But let's say you're trying to drive organizational change in the era of like early electricity. It might have been a reasonable thing to be like, look, I want everyone to try to use electricity. And like, it's sort of, you wouldn't want to like, just, you're not trying to maximize electricity usage in your factory, but like, how would you sort of like, create some of a culture of like experimentation and like, you don't really know yet where electricity is going to be useful, or maybe you have to like moving things around in the assembly line to actually get more out of it. So I think that's like the culture that you want to create a little bit. But I don't know how. I
So
think if you, as soon
I
as you turn it
like,
into measurement, it's like a good hearts problem. I don't know.
yeah, I like where this is going. I think being a almost like a 2-minute, this is how I used AI this week is probably like a good cultural thing to adopt because it allows people to bring something rather than to be pushed because none of us likes to be
Mm,
told what to do. I think that's probably
no.
one. And then I'm thinking a little bit, I think I'm stealing this from my friend Bruno, and if I am Bruno, I apologize, but I the way I've been thinking about it in my personal work is that PRs are experiments now. And the old way that I used to do product development, you wanted it to be an assembly line, kind of to your Toyota comparison. You wanted it to be linear and you wanted to make sure that it was always improving until you got to yes. But now, because the bottleneck is no longer there, you kind of want to like shoot off a bunch of different things. And then it's actually pretty
Hmm.
easy to do quick scans and basically be like, did that go anywhere interesting? If yes, then maybe I'll refine it. But if no, just kill it. Just kill it. Just kill it. And I'm trying next week to make sure that I orient my week a little bit more around like kicking off those experiments and then having the time to go back and evaluate them quickly to see which ones potentially because
Hmm.
it's money on the ground right now that you could just pick up, I think. And so then
I like that. No, sorry, keep.
well, as you say, if you play that out, then maybe you want to be asking people to be making more PRs, right? Like that gets weird at the company level because then you can split that up and make your PRs teeny tiny, which would be an interesting way for this all
Yeah.
to change.
I mean, this has always been a hard problem, so I don't expect it to be easy now. But when I was at Dropbox, I was one of the roles I had was in the growth team for a while, and we were sort of, and then later when I was a PM leader, we were trying to figure out like, how do you think about like the growth team? And I remember a guy who, Abhishek, who I think he maybe had been at like Microsoft Research at some point, and I don't even know if this is true, but what he told me, which I always liked, was that in Microsoft Research, apparently, you are rewarded for doing an experiment that you learn from, and so you'd sort of time bound these like scoped thing. Hey, we have an idea to build X. We're gonna like here's a sort of minimal way that we could like get this out and get some learnings. And like, if it worked, there would be like a party for the team. If it failed, but we got sort of learnings, like that was considered very valuable too, because he probably just saved us from going and doing like a much more expensive version of this thing. The only failure was like, we ran the experiment, but we like didn't design it right, or like we just actually didn't learn something. And so, if you think about PRs as experiments, like I mean, one thing I would add to it, I saw, the CEO of, I want to get his name right, Spellbook, I think it's like Scott Spellbook Legal. I think this is an idea I just stole from him. Scott Stevenson. I think I saw just like a tweet of his, but it's like been sticking with me because he says that there's like two kinds of features. There's like stateless features and stateful features. And like, I'm probably paraphrasing, but what I took from it is like the stateless ones are very, very cheap. And so you should almost just get them to production quickly and like flag it on for a user and just like, almost like test with customers like as fast as you can. Because if you're wrong, those are very easy to change or just deprecate it. Stateful ones are the ones where, and now I'm like, I've already like reworked how I think about this. 'Cause I'm like, as soon as I touch my database schema, I'm like, wait a minute, let's like put a little more like thought into this because like if we want to change this, we're gonna have to do database migrations, and that there's still a cost there. And so I'm trying to almost triage in my head like what kind, or like even when I review code, when I see it's just like UI code, it's like I see a bunch of React and Tailwind. I don't really look at the code. I just open the browser and I like let me play around. Like that's the way I want to test that code. But when I see state or like weird things across architectural boundaries, I'm like, okay, there's some smell here. I gotta like figure out what's going on. But like kind of developing our heuristics for like what is a sort of a cheap PR that is pretty safe to merge. Also, we added a flag system that's been great. Just like how put it behind a flag it on for yourself, flag it on for the team. Like how quickly can we kind of get to something we can play with and like learn from, I guess.
Review code.
Yeah, I do. I'm curious you too. So I saw like on Twitter, I saw Andrew Chen. I mean, he's not an engineer. He's like a DOVC, but he was like growth guy at Uber and whatnot. He's been talking to engineers. He says about 50% review the code and 50 don't. He did a little poll. I don't know. I do review. I would say I review all the code, and I don't review it all closely. But my gate is I review it in my IDE, and I usually have an agent working, and then I'm like in my IDE, and I have rules for the agent. You can never add to Git, you can never push or commit anything. I do that, and so I use the staging area in Git to like keep track of like, okay, this is in the area, like I'm happy with this, and then I'm often like asking, I'm like when I see stuff I don't like, I'm kind of like I'll paste it back in. I'll be like, yeah, what are you doing here? I'm trying to like giving it feedback basically, and my gate is like, okay, that's good enough. I'll add this file. And so I try to basically, get, I don't know, 10, 20,000 lines of code done, but I kind of want to see it all. And so I think there's a question of like, like, do you want friction? I don't know. Like, I'm not yet, I might be doing this wrong. There's a lot of people are like, oh, you have to figure out how to like not review the code, but I'm just not really sure I need to go any faster, to be honest. Like we're already going so fast in the amount of code we're producing that like the limiting factor is like, showing that to customers and sort of more the go-to-market side. So I like to sort of at least load it up in my head of like having a feel for like how the code base is changing. So I never just like come across a file and I'm like, where did this come from? So I review it.
This is how you know you're the architect and not the cowboy. Yeah. No, I usually do not review the code. I do look at what files are being introduced or what files are changing occasionally, and I do manual tests any feature of any size. I mean, that's really where I'm catching things. I have gotten into a pretty good loop with the Chrome MCP tool. It's the one MCP that I use all the time where I can get Claude to actually do some manual testing for me. And what I like about it is that it will actually be running in on one of my monitors. And that means I still manual test it afterwards, but I can sort of see and be like, that has a thing that I did not expect it to have. Like, what is going on? Or look a little bit more closely. Or I can be looking at it and being like, wow, like that really works. I've been working on at my day job, I've been working on like a search feature. And so I can, have it run through, bunches of different test cases and see some results, and it kind of just keeps rolling through, and you just build some intuition. It doesn't get rid of it, but it has meant that by the time you actually get there that you're like, okay. So, but I am not going to go line by line and just be like, you didn't put the, I have some guardrails built in thanks to you. I've started to kind of like add those into the process. I picked up testing. And in fact, if I'm going to read anything, I'm going to read a test because I want to understand how am I going to know if this is broken more than I care about the implementation.
It's nice. We when the other engineer joined my team, I basically had no real tests. I just was doing a lot of manual testing. Now it's been satisfying to kind of see we've been, just having, I think, a clear sense of sort of like where some of the architectural boundaries are, and like just adding tests. And it's like I just call it like PM check, and that's the thing that like agent, you must run this, and I just keep loading up like more and more more stuff in there. So it's like very satisfied every time I see the agent like think it's done, and like it's just like, oh, cool. I just ran like 500 tests. The types pass, the formatter pass. We validated a few things against Zod schema. It's just like the more I can just I love that feeling. It's like so many checks happening in parallel. I wonder, okay, you've told me this Chrome thing like a few times, and every time I'm like, I should go do that, and then I go back to my desk and I just like go back to what I was doing. So which is the Chrome MCP? I've still never used an MCP somehow, and like that one actually sounds like the one that I want. And I've also been trying to figure out like where can I experiment with skills for myself. So it seems like a good use case where if I think about like how do I do manual testing in the browser, like I almost want to go do an experiment since you've told me this like 3 times. I'm like, that sounds awesome. It's like you write a little skill for like how are we gonna like manually test using this MCP thing. So I think what is the one what is the one that you're using that you like?
Yeah. So there's two. This is the one whose name I always remember, Chrome Dev Tools MCP. Um, and it's great. I'll drop it into the show notes for people that want to check it out. The other one is Sawyer. Wait, I think it's Sawyer Hood. Here I think I found it. Dev browser. I think the main difference for this dev browser is that it's more token efficient.
Hmm, okay.
I'm not
Well, I'm trying to
hitting.
use as many tokens as I can, so I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. Your good heart's lawing this. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
that'll yeah. I'm not gonna get my token usage up, man.
your CEO is a stickler, so you gotta.
I know.
So I mean, both, but for me, they both work, somewhat interchangeably. It's mostly
Hmm.
the like being able to tell Claude, hey, go and test this, and go and manually test it, see if it looks the way you want. So anyway,
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, all right. I'm gonna actually check this out. One other thing I've been kind of thinking about. I'm curious if you have any tips on like how do you stay in flow. I remember the old like there's like an old Ethan Mollick post about like cyborgs and centaurs. When we code, it's sort of like, okay, here's the human part of me, and then I hand off to this like agent thing, and it comes back. One thing I find I'm always trying to kind of calibrate is just like how much parallelism to use. Because if I looked at I use Conductor as my like kind of workspace thing. If I looked at it right now, I probably have like 20, work trees, and some of them I leave around. Like they're kind of like, it's kind of a reminder to come back to that thing. Some of them are like research things. Some are kind of I try things in and so it's like almost it's too easy to multitask. So like I'll be working on something and I'll see, oh, like the Vercel toolbar says like we don't have like good open graph images here, but I'll just like go and like start that thing. It's like like starting too many things. And so I think it's like a psychology question, probably like for each person, where like in the old world I had an idea of like, okay, I put on headphones, I get some coffee, I do certain things to get me into like a flow state. And now it's like this is almost like default multitasking. So one thing I've found is I like working, I like having two at once, almost more than one, because if I have one, then there's like, I'm waiting for it, and is the temptation is, let me go like check Twitter, like I get a distraction. Whereas if I have two, I always can kind of stay myself in focus. Okay, I'm reviewing this one's thing while that one's working, and then I can flip. But once I get up to like three, four, I don't know. I'm just curious, like, how do you manage your own kind of like psychology to just sort of stay in like a productive zone in these things?
yeah. So I'll say that this is a moving target for me,
Hmm.
but here's what I'm working on now, and I have two sets of rituals. One is within the day, and then one is within the week. And so within a day, I think I work the best when I have 90 minutes to 2 hours to spend 100% focused on agents and nothing else.
Hmm. Hmm.
And usually there I have one major thing that I want to get done that is like my most important thing. And usually that's something where there's a pretty tight loop where either I am like trying to spec and figure out what I want, or I am trying to validate, and I need to do that, but it's going to take most of my attention. And then I might have two or three or sometimes four um other things. Sometimes those are things that are like connected to the same project, that like your open graph thing, like small things I just want
Hmm.
to hit.
Hmm. Hmm.
And sometimes those things I actually just let them be something I'm interested in or creative in. This is the CLI tool that I'm gonna launch next time. It came out of that. I just had some extra bandwidth. I wanted to see if something could come out of it, and that feels really good. And usually at the end of like 2 hours, I'm tired and I'm ready to like take a break and do some other stuff. So then I find that within the week, I need to make sure that I have one like 45-minute to 1 hour session where I go back through open PRs. And basically I'm like,
Hmm.
kill, save, kill, interesting,
Hmm.
interesting,
Hmm.
because you just end up, they sprout. And then sometimes in that time, I think of it as like gardening the PRs and making sure that I end the week like clear. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay, that's nice. Yeah, I mean, we do a little daily stand up in the morning where my CEO kind of shares usually like upcoming customer context and whatnot, and then like each of us, kind of, it's like it's not very structured. It's like in a whiteboard, but it's like I kind of try to like say what I think I'm gonna do today, and then usually there's a few side quests, but I like to have sort of a main quest. Like, okay, if I don't get this done, like this is kind of the main thing I'm trying to do. I should at least get that done, and then I can do some side quests. But it's weird. I mean, it's like kind of like the rituals we used to maybe do like 2 week sprints, or some teams do 1 week, or at Dropbox we had 6 week sprints for sort of like cross team coordination, but then internally teams might do one or two, and like we had some of those rituals of like stand ups or sprint planning or something. But now I find it's like, I mean, we're roughly doing like 1 day sprints, I would say. And we have some idea of like, we have like backlog and sort of some roadmap of where we're going. But the amount you can get done in a day now is like, I mean, it's high enough that it's like, I would have thought maybe that would be like a 2 week sprint, and now you can do it in about a day. So like, then we can just reprioritize like tomorrow based on kind of what we learn or new things that come up.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
there's
do
another
think that it's
funny,
changed. My friend Bruno, who I'm gonna try to get him to come on at some point, but he's at a 6-person team, and I kind of wonder if that's the cap. And like beyond that, it gets tough to manage the coherence because I just think you end up then with too many different. You then
hmm
need the right swim lanes and connection points, and maybe
hmm
that's where you
hmm
start to do like 4-week sprints for like across the teams and dailies within the team, because I do think that you need that
hmm
daily check-in with the other people that are on the same thing. And I can see how you get to like 3 to 5, but once you get into to 15, all of a sudden you need that
hmm
coordination layer, right? I think
hmm
and I feel like about once a week, I'm like, there are going to be no more PMs and designers. And then about once a week, I'm like, actually, it's going to look exactly the same. And the
yeah,
reason it's going to look exactly the same is because you still need somebody to cast the visual vision, and you still need somebody to think
yeah,
about how. And I flip back and forth between that all the time.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd really buy the notion that like AI is just gonna like save us from all the drudgery. I think like people I talk to, it's like I think we're just people are working like more intensely than ever because there's almost now this like a little bit this like agent anxiety that in the way that I used. I mean, now I consider myself an engineer, but I used to be a PM, and maybe that's why I feel kind of flexible and like how to think about this. But like it feels to me a lot like when I was a PM trying to like unblock engineers. Like how many different tech leads could I kind of coordinate with? And okay, let's go have a meeting and nudge that thing along. Let's go unblock that one. But like having the engineers be blocked, like the opportunity cost of that is high enough that I'm like, I need to like go and make sure I unblock that. Now it's just like they're all blocked. That's like I unblock. Like 10 minutes later, it's like okay, they're all like now waiting for like their next step from me. So it's
Well, that's why
yeah.
I like the metaphor of PRs as bets, because then you don't necessarily feel bad about the like high risk, high reward one kind of lingering a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, because what you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to do is like get yourself, because they are no longer blocked, right? It is perpetual, right? So it's like it's more like how do you make sure that you're flipping over the right card? It's almost like a search function in a way.
I like that. Okay.
But I think rituals and playing and experimentation with stuff is like absolutely the most important thing right now,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
it's combinatorial, right? You have to try it, see what happens, try it again.
Yeah, we don't know how to use electricity in factories. We're all trying to figure it out. You got to experiment a lot. One of my favorite metaphors I heard this week, I think it was Dan Shipper. He called it pirate and architect. For some reason, I think I must have misread it. And I came in and I like was chatting with my team, and I called it cowboy and architect. So that's what we're going with. But I think, we got the idea from Dan Shipper. But basically, his like, statement, you can go find it, is like, that the ideal team structure right now is 2 engineers. One is the cowboy, or sorry, one is the pirate. I'll use his terminology. Is it basically like vibe code as fast as you possibly can to like get something in customers' hands, because like you're trying to build something people want, and product fit is all that matters. Like how do you do that quickly? And then the architect is like also vibe coding, but like slower and like slightly more carefully and thinking about. And so I liked that as a metaphor. Like I came in, I was chatting with the other engineer on my team, and we both thought it was kind of funny. So we've been talking about sort of the cowboy architect. But what I don't like about it is I don't think those should be like fixed people. In part because I think it just creates moral hazard for the cowboy to just be like cowboyed all over the place and like not sort of owning the debt that is, like who wants to be the janitor like cleaning up after the cowboys like getting all the glory. And so we've just adopted it more as like hats. And so
Mm-hmm.
yesterday we actually just declared like a cowboy day, and we're like, okay, both of us are going to just like I'm often in like we have an experimental part of our mono repo. I can ship whatever I want there. I can put things behind flags. I'm trying to figure out like almost in production behind a flag how this flow can work for we're going to like this trip next week for this enterprise customer. So I'm trying to work backward from like what is like a sick demo that I could like bring to that meeting. I don't know yet. I'm kind of like doing it in production, but that's cowboy land. And then other times I'm like, okay, I got to put on the architect hat and like clean up this mess. I'm like, who made this? Like, oh, it was me in the cowboy, the cowboy hat. I got to go like do like a database migration to like change from this old way to this new way, and like do that. That's like more architect hat. But I kind of like the explicitness of like you need some mix of hat, and then you could almost think about, hey, what do we need? Do we need more cowboy energy, or maybe we need like more architect energy, or like, um, yeah, I like.
I love that. I like cowboy versus architect better, because I think it captures the vibe a little bit more of like being a cowboy and just like doing some things that are not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
But then the architect, I think, is still super important. I mean, that's the coherence layer, right? And yeah, I'll bring that into my world a little bit and see
Yeah,
See
I
if
mean, it
anybody grabs
maps to
onto it.
the stateless, stateful feature, the PR experiment. It's like, what's the cost of being wrong? If it's like, what I mean, Marty Kagan always had a nice thing too. I forget what this is like the four risks, I think is like an old post that I always liked about, if you're, this was kind of directed to PMs, but you're like, why do products or features fail? And, they can fail because they're not valuable. That's probably the main reason. Like, if my startup dies, why will it have died? Like, if you don't build something people want, you die. And that's the default. People are busy. They'll say nice things, but like, if it's not a top pain point that they're willing to pay for, like you die. You can fail for feasibility reasons. And sometimes people are too early, like the Apple Newton, or there's certain things that just like, okay, we can't actually build that yet. The ideas were kind of right, but like it's not feasible. You can fail for, usability is usually addressable. If you have like, value, you can usually fix your usability. Like, there might be a reason why people can't get the value of your software if it's not usable. And then I guess there's like business viability was the other one that in a big organization, like, does this match the metabolism of like how we sell or market or kind of the ACV or whatever? There's like, and so I like these four risks. Because I think the Cowboy is sort of like, how do you want to like de-risk? You almost want to pick like, what is the like riskiest thing? And then how do we go and like address that as soon as possible? And so the Cowboy theme is like, I don't know if this is the right thing that our customers are going to want. So how do I get some, MVP behind a flag to this one guy, like to like kind of like learn some of that and see, am I on the right track of like, this other human actually values this? Whereas then the architect is a little bit more like, okay, let's keep up our ability to like ship quickly, run experiments, not have that combinatorial explosion of complexity you're talking about.
Probably a good place to leave it.
All right, man. Always a pleasure.
See ya.